Hello, my name is Alex Cassian, and I'm going to be sharing in this video the process of this portrait painting that was done completely from life in a total of 4 hours. The paint I'm starting with is called transparent yellow oxide, which is a lighter pigment that allows me to make very light marks that are easy to correct and move around. The surface I'm using is actually paper that has been covered with a gray, neutral gray ground, and so that the oil doesn't leak through. As I advance in my painting, I'm adding a bit of transparent red oxide, so you see that darker part of the painting, and then once the darks are marked, within the first couple minutes, I'm also marking the lightest spots on the painting. So as you saw me before, I added some pure titanium white, which then I surrounded with values that connect my darks and my lightest light. I've been sharing my work online and have been receiving quite a bit of great questions. One of the questions that people have been asking me was about the palette. So I'm painting on glass, and underneath that glass, I have a grayscale that I've designed myself and have it printed and placed under glass. The reason why I have the grayscale is so that I could quickly orient myself in my value scale. Additionally, as you see, I'm using at the moment 4 different brushes. Each of these brushes is dedicated to a specific limited range of values because I've mentioned that in my past video, and I think this is one of the most important things to say. One of the reasons why people tend to get muddy looking oil paintings is because if your brush has both dark value and light value, sometimes you will end up getting a lot of contamination in your oil painting. So one of the things that I found really useful, especially when you're painting from life where time is very limited, is dedicating each brush to a limited set of values. That being said, it's much easier to shift hues. So for example, if I'm working with a mid-tone beige and it needs to be a little bit more red or a little bit more yellow, you can definitely use the same brush. However, if you're using a brush full of dark color and then you want to shift it to a lighter value, that would get done much faster if you use a completely different brush. As a matter of fact, here I'm painting this really bright pink hat using alizarin crimson and just a drop of cadmium red. I've actually introduced a separate brush for it. So the more brushes you have, the more efficient your painting will be. One of the things to keep in mind when you paint from life is your proper management of your timing. For instance, this painting was done in a total of 4 hours. However, I found that dividing 4 hours in 25-minute segments is a pretty good way of managing your time because 25 minutes is not too tough on your model. And also, as an artist, it gives you an opportunity to stand back, have a look at your painting, analyze it, and maybe have a better idea of what to take care of for the next 25 minutes. Additionally, I learned the hard way never to agree with a model to just paint until they get tired. You always need to have a very concrete starting time and end time. This way, if your model all of a sudden starts to fall asleep, well, at least you know exactly how long you're going to be asking them to pose, because it's really hard to stay awake while there's no movement at all. So when you have a concrete plan with a model, 25 minutes at a time, and you stretch, you get some tea and coffee together, and the time goes by much faster. So at this point, I'm going back to the face, and I'm looking for any kind of variations of values in the facial area. Once I feel like I get the general idea, I'm going to be going over the rest of the composition. So at this point, I'm adding some more nuances some more information rather, in the neck and the shirt. Now, the shirt is actually quite useful in here because I'm making it pretty dark, maybe even darker than it was in life, so that I could have a full tonal range in my painting. Because the face has some of the lightest values. However, having a really dark shirt adds a really nice overall contrast, and it just serves as a pretty interesting, point of design in the composition. That being said, also my model came in with this pink beanie, and I thought it was really, really cool because it just added a nice punch, nice element of design to the composition, and I just really loved it. So having it in my painting was a pretty cool idea. So now that I've marked most of the parts of the paintings with appropriate values, I'm going back and I'm trying to work each and every area by breaking the large shapes into smaller shapes and really trying to read those smaller nuances and turns of forms. One of the things that I've discovered is that, and it was pretty cool discovery, is that if you're creating transitions from darker color to lighter color, so let's say around the nose, if I'm going from the highlight and then down to midtones and then into the darks, going from light to darks, your transition will be a little bit sharper, will feel a little bit sharper. Your scales will feel a little bit more divided, which is sometimes what you want in order to get the clarity. However, I also noticed that if you're doing the opposite, so if you're starting from a dark value and all you do is you add light colors to it, your transitions will feel a lot softer. Now, it's not that one is better than the other. It really depends on the situation. Let me give you an example. For instance, you're painting the bottom of the nose and you would like to insert the nostrils. So by having a lighter color of the skin of the nose, of the bottom of the nose, you can insert some kind of a transparent color, let's say transparent red oxide, that you would apply over your lighter value, and that separation would create a really nice and interesting defined lines and defined shapes. However, on the other hand, if you're transitioning the form from the darker value, so somewhere from the shadow of the cheeks into the light, you can get that transition smoother just by adding to your midtones just a bit of lighter colors. And this way you'll get just a nice and soft and smooth transition. And then there are certain moments when you want to have more of a definition. So for example, you have the eye, and then under the lower eyelid you have a bit of that sharp shadow. So just by having slightly darker color, you could have that nice separation in your values. Another question I get frequently asked is whether I use some of these colors pre-mixed. So I found it pretty useful to have your palette prepared in advance and have some of the colors pre-mixed. Now, the premixed colors, of course, they can only serve as a really good base. However, as you paint along, you can adjust the values. But it's quite faster to paint with a pretty good premixed base because, for example, as you see on my palette, I have some of those lighter pink beige colors. So I take them as my foundation for the colors that follow. However, then I will adjust depending on the part of the portrait that I'm painting. So for example, if I'm working in the area of the nose, obviously I'll have a bit more red, and then if I'm working around the chin which will have a lot more cooler colors. Then I'll shift to something more, I'll add more blues and so on and so forth. But it's really helpful to have premixed colors, especially if you're trying to match your values fast. So that's really where having premixed colors is pretty helpful. Now, that being said, the brushes that I'm using, they're this kind of a medium-sized round brushes, and I really like using round brushes because one of the things that you can do about the round brushes is that you can actually shape them into the brush that you want it to be. And oftentimes I'll actually shape my round brush into almost like a filbert brush, and so that I could sculpt my form rather than just using very mechanically the brush. So you'll see in my brush movement that my brush almost fills in each and every shape, breaking it down as a puzzle. And having a really good brush helps, because if your brush is too soft, it's not that too soft or too hard of a brushes are good or bad. You really need to test different brushes and find the one that responds best to the surface that you're using. As I was saying before, the surface that I'm painting on is paper. And it's actually really smooth paper. It's smooth bristled paper that has some ground so that the paint wouldn't leak through, or rather oil wouldn't leak through. So, and because my surface is really smooth, having overly hard brushes would probably not work as well, because they would be removing my previous layers. So having a brush that is not too coarse, but also not too soft, because with soft brushes, it just takes forever to put any paint on the surface. Another question I often get is whether I mix my paints with any mediums, such as any solvents, liquid, or even walnut oil. I think that in Alla Prima painting, best way to go about it is actually just use straight up paint. The reason why I can get away with not using any medium is because, once again, the surface that I'm using is very smooth. If you're painting on a typical cotton canvas with that acrylic gesso that feels almost like a sandpaper, you might not be able to do what I'm doing here. However, when you have a surface that is very smooth, you can start painting straight away with paint straight out of tube. It's important to keep in mind that the paint that I'm starting with is pretty transparent. So, the quality of transparent yellow oxide is that the pigment itself is not very strong, especially when you're starting off a gray background. So it doesn't really have that much pigmentation. Maybe over a white background and over a coarser canvas, it would act differently. But on a smooth surface that is gray, it's a really fantastic place to start. Also, as you add a bit of your initial paint, any other layer of paint adds on really, really smoothly. And the whole process feels really nice and very smooth. As my painting gets more and more advanced, I'm trying to resolve the areas that are requiring the most amount of attention. So that would be around the eyes. And at this point, I'm also starting to work more and more with smaller brush. So I'm using my previous medium-sized brush, and at some points I'm going to be introducing my smaller brush to break down those shapes and to really get those micro variations of form around the eyes. So for example, if you're painting the eyebrow, just having a straight line won't cut it. I mean, it just doesn't represent exactly what the person looks like. So it's really helpful to take your time and observe every little variations and every little changes of forms and of angles on the eyebrows and on the eyes. Another thing when working around the eye area is to watch out for how much contrast you are putting. So even even if you're working on the white of the eye, it doesn't really mean that you have to plaster the eyes with just pure white. So you have to identify what would be the best way, what would be rather the best value to add in the lightest area of the eye, and then take it from there. Same thing goes for the highlights. You don't necessarily want to put pure white highlight on the eye because that might just stand out way too much. And while you're working on the eyes, you could also revise other parts of the face and do the same thing. Just observe those really small variations. So once again, because I'm working with a live model, one of the things that I'm trying to do is at the beginning of the 25-minute segment, I'm trying to focus more on the eyes because your model naturally gets tired. So you want to take care of the eyes at the beginning of those 25 minutes, and then as the time goes by, so let's say by the time you get closer to the end of the session, this is when you can paint other parts like beard or the hair or the cheeks, because even if your model's eyes appear to be more tired, it won't affect your painting at all. So that's a pretty useful trick to know when you're working with the model. And in fact, speaking of timing, I always have a timer next to me so that I could have a clear idea of where I'm standing in terms of time, so that just like the example I gave you about the eyes, you can tell yourself, well, out of 25 minutes, the first 8 you can spend painting the eyes, and then the rest you can just explore everything else, and then in the last, let's say 2-3 minutes, you can paint parts of the body, or rather the face, that will not affect the outcome of your portrait. In my opinion, painting, or at least realist painting, feels a lot like trying to solve puzzles. So you look at your model, you look at shapes, you memorize those shapes, and literally just like puzzles, you put those shapes together. And the closer you match the right puzzles and the more accurate your puzzles are placed together, the more we get the feel of likeness. So oftentimes when we look at the model and say that the painting looks like or doesn't look like the model, it's pretty much the idea whether you were able to memorize and match the shapes closely to the model. Painting Alla Prima from life is both challenging yet really fun process. At the beginning, it might feel a little bit discouraging because there are way too many things to take care of, way too many things to consider. So you have to get the drawing right, you have to get the colors right, you have to be comfortable handling the oil paint. However, in a matter of minutes, you're able to create something completely independent of any technology. I mean, you're able to sit down there and just create something completely from life in a matter of 4 hours, which I consider it to be pretty fast. Once my painting is complete, what I try to do is, especially if there's somebody who purchases the artwork, what I do is I mount this paper on a panel. I like painting on paper because I paint a lot. I paint almost every day, and at some point I just ran out of space and I had to figure out some kind of a way for me to make it feasible to paint as much as I do. And so painting on paper solves the problem of storage because obviously it's very easy to store and it's pretty safe to store. So if you put the paper in some kind of a portfolio folder, it's pretty safe. However, if I want to hang this portrait, what I'll do is I oftentimes mount my paper on panels, and then I like to apply a varnish over the finished piece. So on average, it takes my painting to dry about 10 days, and then depending on the varnish you use, you have to wait different amounts of time. So the varnish that I like to use is Gamvar. What's really cool about Gamvar is that you don't really need to wait something like 6 months, like you would have to use with the traditional varnishes, such as the Mar varnish. So Gamvar, according to manufacturer's instructions, you can apply it when it's dry to touch. So typically, I will wait around 10 days from the moment when I made the painting, and then I'll mount it on the panel, and only then I'll varnish. Now, the reason why I'll mount it first and then varnish is because varnish tends to stay a little bit sticky for some time, and so when you're applying a lot of pressure while gluing, you might damage the varnish. So what I tend to do is I'll put some parchment paper over the painting, and then I'll apply a large panel and then add a bunch of books. So that will put quite a bit of pressure, and then I'll leave that overnight, and in the morning I'll put some varnish, let it dry for a couple of days, and then if there's a framing that's coming up, then I'll put it in the frame. And that's pretty much the entire process of the painting. So I hope you enjoyed watching this video. Thanks for watching the entire 22 minutes. This was, of course, 22 minutes of 4-hour painting. If you enjoyed this video and have any questions, please make sure to leave them in the comments. And I'm going to try to address your questions in the next video. I really enjoyed making these, so I'm going to try to post some more soon.